Hello and welcome. Welcome here to this public lecture of the Ways of Knowing introductory class. We're delighted to have the Ways of Knowing students here, the other members of the faculty and staff here at CMU, and members of the public and other students. Thank you and welcome to you all for being here. I get the very enjoyable task of introducing our speaker for today. Just let me briefly explain the format. I will give you a short introduction to our speaker, then we get to hear the public lecture, then there will be a period of time for questions and answers, and then at various points we will make loud and raucous applause. Let's practice right now, shall we? Excellent. You got this, love it. So I get to introduce Dr. Stephanie Petsamai-Stobbe. She is a professor in peace and conflict transformation studies and in business here at Canadian Mennonite University. She is also a leading expert on Southeast Asian dispute resolution processes and has conducted conflict resolution and peace-building workshops around the world, including in Laos, Myanmar, and Thailand, with political leaders, NGOs, and civil societies. As an active educator, trainer, and alternative dispute resolution practitioner and professional, she has worked and conducted research in Canada, United States, South America, Europe, India, and Asia. Quite the list. Stephanie has also served on the ADR Institute of Manitoba and ADR Institute of Canada boards, on the American Bar Association team of experts advising the United Nations Development Program, Peacebuilding Support Office, on gender-responsive peacebuilding, and as a visiting professor and researcher at the Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution at the University of Hawaii. She was an expert advisory board member for Asia-Pacific Refugee Studies at Auckland University in New Zealand, and is currently a fellow of McLaughlin College at York University, and president of Canadian Association for Refugees and Forced Migration Studies. A noted author, she has published books with Emerald Publishing, Routledge, and Lexington Books, and has an upcoming book with McGill Queen's University Press. She also serves as the Lexington Series book editor for conflict resolution and peace building in Asia. Stephanie is one of the principal researchers for the Hearts of Freedom National Refugee Oral History Project, and is the creator and curator of the museum exhibition Hearts of Freedom, Stories of Southeast Asian Refugees, that's traveling across Canada. Now, in addition to this impressive list of Dr. Stobbe's qualifications and credentials, I need to add a few more as her colleague. I have been Dr. Stobbe's colleague for more than 25 years, and in that capacity, I need to say things that the official biography doesn't cover. I need to mention her dedication, her commitment, and her passion for her work and for her research. I need to talk about her enormous capacity to juggle many things and to do them all exceptionally well. I need to express my gratitude for bringing the stories of Hearts of Freedom to light and to life as she has. And I need to say how glad I am she is here today. She was on sabbatical last year, traveling across the country with the Hearts of Freedom exhibit, which is now going international. But we are grateful that she is here today. We are grateful that she accepted our invitation to be our Ways of Knowing One public lecturer today. Dr. Stobbe, thank you. We look forward to hearing from you. Raucous applause.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I have great colleagues here at the university, and so it's really great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this lecture, and I'm thrilled to be able to share with you hope and resilience, ways of understanding refugee stories. And so to just give you a little bit of background onto this topic, and when we are looking at the topic of refugees, I think it's really important for us to understand some of the international laws, conventions, declarations that protect refugees. And one of them is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was created in 1948. And some of you may know that Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the wife of US President Franklin Roosevelt, chaired the UN commission that works with the Declaration, and she actually collaborated with a Canadian, John Humphrey, who is a Canadian law professor and director of the UN Division on Human Rights. And so these are some of the common standards for all peoples and nations, and these are fundamental human rights that are universally protected. And it has been signed by 192 states around the world, so these are members of the UN, and it's been translated to over 500 different languages, and there are 30 articles in this declaration. So you can see here on the screen the preamble. It says, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. And so I think that's really, really important when we look at this declaration. So I'm going to just talk about a few of the articles. There are 30 of them, but just to give you some background. So if you look at article number 1, so this is an article that I think pertains to refugees as well as to all humans, but all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in spirit of brotherhood. And article 3 says everyone has a right to life, liberty, and security of person. And Article 13 says everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Everyone has a right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. And Article 14, everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. So when you are hearing in the media that people are illegally entering our country, we have a legal obligation, because Canada signed onto the UN Convention as well as to the Declaration, we have an obligation to actually assist refugees. And they are not entering our country illegally because they have a universal right to be able to seek asylum in other countries. And so just to give you an idea in terms of the International Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And a couple of other conventions and protocols that I think are really important when we are talking about refugees. And one of them is the 1951 Refugee Convention, which was adopted in 1951. And this convention provides protection for refugees, as well as provides countries or states who have signed on to it with obligations to assist them. And this 1951 Refugee Convention is actually limited to protecting European refugees in the aftermath of World War II. And so these are for refugees who are fleeing Europe as a result of the war, and these events have to occur before January 1, 1951. And so the 1967 protocol basically accepts everything that the 1951 Refugee Convention states, but it removed the geographic and time limits, meaning that refugees from anywhere in the world, and it doesn't depend on the time limits before 1951, can seek, asylum and can apply to become be considered a refugee if they have been persecuted. And so that's the difference, right, between the 1951, which was European focused, and then it had a specific date, and then the 1967 protocol then removed the geography and the time limits. And so today, there are 149 parties to the 1951 Convention and or 1967 Protocol. And so Canada only signed the 1967 Protocol on June 4th, 1969. And so by signing that, they have also agreed to the 1951 Refugee Convention. And so this is the definition of a refugee according to the UN Convention definition. So I'm just going to read it to you here. A refugee is someone who, owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside the country of their nationality and is themselves unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail themselves to the protection of that country and that country of their former habitual residence, is unable or, owing to such fear, is unwilling to return to it. So basically, they fear persecution based on those 5 characteristics, and that the nature of the harm, this persecution is serious and is persistent. And the reasons for their persecution, as mentioned in this definition, is according to the 5 criteria. And then the future harm is that they want protection to prevent future harm, and that they cannot go to their state or their country, their home country is unable or unwilling to protect them, and that's why they are considered a refugee according to the UN Convention definition. And so when you look at Canada, Canada has been regarded as a humanitarian and compassionate country. We have a long history of resettling refugees through the private sponsorship of refugees program, as well as the government-sponsored programs. And between 1979 and 1980, Canada resettled an unprecedented 60,049 Indo-Chinese or Southeast Asian refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And so when you look at stats today, for example, if you look at the United Nations global trends for 2023, you will see that the world, like 24 different countries or states, admitted a total of 158,700 refugees through resettlement. So if you take a look at this number and you look at the 31.6 million refugees under the UNHCR's mandate, that is about less than half of 1% of UNHCR's mandate, so 0.5%. So resettlement is actually a very, very small number in terms of the refugees who we are resettling here in Canada and other countries. And so Canada in 2023, as I said, resettled 51,100 people from mostly Afghanistan, Eritrea, Syria, and Somalia. And so it is a very small number when you look at the overall number of forcibly displaced, as well as the number of refugees under the UNHCR's mandate. And so my research is looking at the stories of Southeast Asian refugees. So over the past few years, this is what I've been working on, and we started this project in the fall of 2018. And the research comes from the stories of these 3 communities. And so these Southeast Asian communities, so the violence in Vietnam was a public face of the war, but the Laos Secret War and the Cambodian genocide were part of the 3 million people who fled Southeast Asia and resettled in 3rd countries. I am one of the many people who remember this firsthand as I came as a child. And so some of you may have heard about the Vietnam War that occurred in Southeast Asia. So it was a civil war between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. North Vietnam was communist, South Vietnam was democratic and was supported by the United States. And they say that in this war, approximately 2 million people died and about 2 million fled as a result of the communists taking over Vietnam in 1975. And these people were the original boat people. So when you hear boat people, these were the people that they were referring to as they fled across the South China Sea in leaky, overcrowded boats. And then the Laos Secret War, which occurred as a result of the spillover of the Vietnam War into that country. And so there was a civil war between the Royal Lao government and the Pathet Lao. So the Pathet Lao are the communists, and they were supported by the North Vietnamese. And then the Royal Lao government was supported by the United States and other allies. And you can see between 1964 and 1973, there were over 2 million tons of bombs that were dropped on this country. And you can see here up there, it says that the Americans dropped a plane load of bombs every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day for 9 years. And so it is considered one of the most heavily bombed countries in the world per capita. And to this day, there are still ordnances and unexploded bombs, and so children would pick up, an object that is shiny and round, and they think it's a toy, and instead it's a cluster bomb. Or farmers will go and plow their fields, and these unexploded bombs would blow up, and many of them have lost limbs. And so the effects of this war and the bombings by the Americans in this country still exists today. And then, of course, the Cambodian genocide. And so this was, again, a civil war between the two different groups. So you have the Cambodian monarchy, and then you have the communist Khmer Rouge. And so this created huge conflicts and genocide where they say an estimated 1.5 to 3 million people were killed during this time, and a number of people then fled Cambodia as a result of that. And so you can see the spillover of the Vietnam War into Laos and Cambodia. And as a result of the communist parties gaining power in 1975 in Cambodia and then Vietnam and Laos in December 1975, many people fled these countries in order to seek freedom. And so these were some of the pictures during that time that the media showed. And so to the right, to my right, there is a picture of Kim Phuc, who was the napalm girl who fled in 1972 after napalm bombs were dropped on her village. And so this picture showed children who were being impacted by that, and she fled as the napalm liquids were burning her skin. And I think this picture captured the world's attention, similar to Alan Kurdi during the Syrian crisis. And so she came to Canada in 1992 and is now a great advocate in terms of peace, in terms of getting rid of bombs and all of these kinds of things. And of course, the photo of different boats in South China Sea that were overcrowded and leaky. Many people talked about starving on these boats, and others described how they were attacked by pirates in the South China Sea. And I remember one story of a young woman who was 18 years old, and she had a younger sister who was 16, and her family could only afford to pay for passage for two of them. And so they were in this overcrowded, leaky boat, and they were attacked by pirates. So you can imagine what happened to the girls. And then after that, they said the pirates decided to have fun with all the people on this boat, and they took a big hook and they put the hook and hooked it onto the refugees' boat, and then they would spin them around and around and around in the sea. And so they were terrified that they were going to die. Eventually, the pirates let them go, and they made it to one of the islands, and then they were able to apply to come to Canada and be resettled here as refugees. And so you hear of these stories, and I think these images and these stories really propelled the world to do something. about the situation, that there was a great humanitarian need, and so Canada stepped up. And Canada, in 1976, we have a new Immigration Act, which actually came into effect in 1978, and they created these legislations. And so in this legislation, they created a separate category of immigrants called refugees. So refugees became a distinct class of immigrants. Before that, they were all just, all together. And so they created a specific class for this, and they used the UN Convention refugee definition for that. And so if you were persecuted and you fear for your life based on those 5 characteristics, then you are considered a refugee. And then in the 1976 Act, they also created provisions for a private sponsorship of refugees, where ordinary Canadians or groups of 5s and organizations can sponsor refugees, and that refugees can be resettled not just through government programs and sponsorships. They also created a designated class, which means that they were able to create a class based on the common situation or experience of these groups. So they actually created an Indo-China class, and in this Indo-China class, they said anyone from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, if you have been persecuted and you fear for your life, then we will group you into this Indo-China class. And this helped to expedite the process of immigration, the process of bringing them over. And so this really helped in terms of the private sponsorship of refugees program. And then on March 5th, 1979, MCC Canada signed the first umbrella or master agreement with the federal government to privately sponsor refugees. And again, this was historic because they were the first group who came together and decided that they would like to do this. And they signed this master agreement. And basically, in signing this, they're saying to the government, we as MCC Canada will take responsibility for the application process, for overseeing when the refugees come, that the sponsors had enough resources, and that they are able to assist the refugees in their settlement and integration. And so this was really important. And then it allowed the government to do other things. And so the government didn't really have to be responsible for any of that, because MCC decided that they were going to take care of all of these kinds of services. And soon after MCC signed the master agreement, other dioceses, churches, and groups began to sign a similar agreement. And so this was something that was really important. And so today, these master agreements are called sponsorship agreement holders, and we have 130 plus of those kinds of agreements in Canada today. So that was really important. And because of this Immigration Act, and they were able to have it come into effect in 1978, and then 1979 was when MCC signed the master agreement. This was really the beginning of the private sponsorship of refugees program, and so they were able to implement this with the Southeast Asian refugees. And so, as you can see here, between 1979 and 1980, as I mentioned earlier, Canada resettled over 60,000 Southeast Asian refugees, and some of them were through private sponsorship of refugees programs, so they say about 34,000, and then 26,000 was through the government sponsorship program. And so this was unprecedented, that in a period of 18 months that they were able to bring in this many number of people. And then you can see in 1978, between 1978 and 1981, the Indo-Chinese refugees represented 25% of immigrants to Canada, compared to 10% worldwide. So this was a huge number in terms of bringing in refugees from Southeast Asia. And then, according to our statistics, we found that between 1975 and 1997, when Canada had this resettlement of Southeast Asian refugees, Canada resettled over 210,000 Southeast Asian refugees, making it the longest and the largest resettlement of non-Europeans to Canada. And so this was significant, right? Before that, we had small pockets of different groups coming in, but this was a period where a large number of people who were non-Europeans were able to resettle here in Canada. And this really changed the face of Canada and really implemented our 1971 Multiculturalism Act, where we can then begin to see the diversity here in Canada. And so you can see here, this is a quote from Lord Axworthy. He was the Minister of Employment and Immigration at that time. He says, "Never before had Canada been involved in a refugee movement which arose so dramatically or persisted in such large numbers for so long. Never had the distances been so vast, the cultural differences so pronounced. Never had groups of Canadians motivated by conscience and a determination to relieve mass suffering become so personally involved, and never before had they joined with their federal and provincial governments in a formal partnership to provide a new homeland for refugees." And so this is a really historic moment in terms of Canada's immigration policies and in terms of Canada welcoming people who were vastly different than they were. And so in 1986, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, awarded the people of Canada the Nansen Medal for their assistance and work with refugees. And so this was very prestigious, and this also, was international recognition for Canada of their work with refugees. And so this medal is actually located right now at the Canadian Museum of History. And so when we were there for our opening, we opened up this part of the exhibition so that they can also walk and go and visit and see the Nansen Medal. And it's the only one that has ever been given to the people or to a country, and it's never been given to another country since. And so we decided to work on this Hearts of Freedom project. It is a community-based research project. And we received invitation from the Vietnamese community who wanted to document their story of resettlement here in Canada and their history of settlement and integration. And soon after that, they were joined by the Laotian and the Cambodian communities. And so all three countries, as I mentioned, experienced violence in Southeast Asia as a result of the Vietnam War, the Laos Secret War, and the Cambodian genocide. And so researchers got together. There are 5 primary researchers. So we had 2 from Carleton University. We had Colleen Lundy and Alan Moscovich. We had 2 from the Canadian Immigration Historical Society, we had Michael Malloy, and Peter Dushinsky, and then myself from Canadian Mennonite University. And so we started to conduct the largest and most comprehensive research on Southeast Asian refugees or former refugees. And we went across Canada from Vancouver all the way to Halifax to document their stories. And this research was funded by Canadian Heritage, IRCC, and DeFair Foundation. And one of the things that we really wanted to take a look at is what are some research methods that we can use to document these stories. And so we use qualitative research for the purposes of creating and being able to obtain a richness of information, and that this information in the form of a story can change the world and reach many people. And as much as science has changed the world, Newton, Galileo, Kepler, that Dr. Vidal talked about in her presentation, storytelling is the heart of communication and social connection. It is how we translate values, morals, ways of knowing, and this is what I love about qualitative research for conflict resolution and for human resources and business, is that it captures stories and the lives and experiences of people. And so we decided to use oral histories and storytelling to capture the experiences of Southeast Asian refugees. And so you can see here in this quote, oral histories from the Columbian Encyclopedia. In creating oral histories, interviews are conducted to obtain information from different perspectives, many of which are often unavailable from written sources. Such materials provide data on individuals, families, important events, or day-to-day life. And Martelli says that oral history refers to the personal stories, memories, and experiences of individuals. And so we actually began to do some trainings on oral histories and storytelling, and this began in 2018 with Dr. Martelli, who is from Concordia Oral History Center. And so storytelling, according to Dr. Senahi, who is a scholar in this area, she says that storytelling is language, encompassing vocabulary, grammar rules, norms of communicative behavior, and narrative forms. Language is society's most complex symbolic system, and such, language encodes the culture of a particular community, including shared understandings of identity, power, history, values, and utopian visions. And so storytelling is something that we can all do, right? We're all familiar with telling stories since we were children and hearing stories, and it's something that we can do without a lot of equipment. We can just share our stories in informal ways. And so the larger research team, the majority of them were from the Southeast Asian communities themselves. And so we had community coordinators, interviewers, camera operators. All of these people were from the Vietnamese, Laotian, and Cambodian communities. And we decided to conduct these oral histories that were video recorded in high resolution, 4K resolution. And we interviewed 173 people across Canada. And the majority of the interviews were of Southeast Asian refugees. So 145 of those interviews were of Southeast Asian refugees, and then 28 were of government and sponsors and other Canadians. And so 84% of them were of the former refugees themselves. And so we did interview a few government officials. We managed to interview former Prime Minister Joe Clark, as well as former Minister of Employment and Immigration Lord Axworthy here in Winnipeg. We also interviewed a number of NGOs, including MCC Canada, William Jansen, and he just received the Order of Canada this year for his work. And we also interviewed Operation Lifeline's Howard Edelman, as well as the Mayor of Ottawa, Marion Duval, who was part of Project 4000. And so a number of NGOs we were able to interview. And then in Winnipeg, we interviewed besides the former refugees, we interviewed John Wheeler, who is with MCC Canada, and we also interviewed Art DeFer, a businessman, about his work during that time between 1979 and 81 when he did the humanitarian work called the Land Bridge between the borders in Cambodia and Thailand. And so we were able to do this, and we were able to conduct these interviews in 5 languages. And so it was very, very complex. So we interviewed people in English, in French, the 2 official languages here in Canada, but we also interviewed people in Vietnamese, Laotian, and Cambodian. And this was really important, because I think if they are able to tell their stories and share their stories in a language that they preferred, we are going to get much more rich information and much more in-depth storytelling. And sometimes, if they are sharing stories, it is much funnier if it's in their language than if it's being translated in English. And so this was something that we wanted to do, especially for those who would prefer to speak in the other languages. And because our interviewers, camera people, and coordinators were from those ethnic communities, we were able to do simultaneous translations. And so, for example, when we were here in Winnipeg, we actually interviewed them here at CMU in the boardroom, and one woman was saying that she felt more comfortable speaking in Lao. So basically, I sat behind the camera person, and I did simultaneous translation for her. And so that's how we conducted these interviews. And so I think this is, really important to be able to do that, and also to have people on the team who were from those ethnic communities who can assist us with this, because this is part of their story. So some of them were part of the story, others, their parents were part of the stories, and their community members. And so the Hearts of Freedom project, I think, is important because these former refugees wanted to document their oral histories and stories, but they didn't know how to do it. And that's why they came up to us and they said, could you help us with this? And as many of them were getting older, so if they came here as adults, now they might be in their 70s or 80s, and so they were getting older, and they really wanted to have this documented and shared, and they wanted to be able to share this with their own children and their grandchildren. And then those who were younger too were able to share their stories and were able to tell their stories in a way that they experienced them. And the media's coverage of the Vietnam War and the spillover into Laos and Cambodia also helped to highlight the importance of assisting refugees, the importance of being compassionate, and the importance of helping refugees resettle here in Canada. And so Canada was then able to offer resettlement to people, as I mentioned, from vastly different cultures. They spoke different languages, they had different religions, and so they were very different than the European immigrants who came to Canada. And so this really put multiculturalism into practice, as I mentioned earlier. And so this was a way for the refugees to really document their stories. And I think these stories are very, very powerful. And I was just at the Basili School of International Affairs last week for the opening events there. And one of the women who we interviewed shared her story of how she was able to escape from Laos and ended up in a refugee camp in Thailand and made her way to Canada, and the difficult experience that she had and the difficulties and obstacles and the trauma that she experienced. She recalled the moment when her family decided to leave, and her family owned a farm. They had many horses and buffaloes. She had many pets like dogs and cats, and she said when they were leaving, they actually had to tie up all of their animals so that their animals wouldn't follow them and make noise. And so that was really, really sad for her because she really missed them and she really loved her pets. And then recently, when she heard Donald Trump talking about the Haitian immigrants eating all the pets, she was traumatized by that, and she was really hurt by those false stories because she said she herself loved her pets, and that is not true, that immigrants and refugees are eating all of these pets. And so then these stories then help to tell the truth, right, of what has happened and what these immigrants and refugees have experienced. And so we decided that telling the story is just the first half of the process. And in order for us to complete the cycle, we had to have someone who will want to hear it, and then we have to have a mechanism in terms of how to share these stories. And so we did different things in terms of our dissemination. And so some people I know will read our book with McGill Queen's University Press. It's 400 pages long. And some people will review our curriculum. But I also know that from the Southeast Asian community, some of these people will not read our 400-page book, and they would be more interested in something that is visually oriented, such as a film or an exhibition. And so in order to reach the wider communities, we needed to create something such as an exhibition, and then to have it travel across Canada to the places where we conducted interviews, and to share it with the communities and to celebrate with them. And as you may know, Southeast Asians love gatherings and any opportunity for a celebration. And so by creating this museum exhibition and having it travel across Canada, we were able to do this with the communities. And so I think, creating, for example, an exhibition is really important. It is something that I have not done before as an academic. I'm used to writing a book or an article, making presentations, but I have never created a museum exhibition. And I had great advisors from the National Museums. So I worked with advisors from the Canadian Museum of History, Laura Sankini. I worked with an advisor from the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 in Halifax, Emily Burton, and others from the museums, and they really were able to work with me and advise me on things. I had no idea that French translation for an exhibition is different than regular translation. Font sizes matter, colors matter, accessibility guidelines, provincial and national guidelines. So if I wanted my exhibition to be hosted at a national museum, I had to meet their guidelines. And so there were all kinds of things to think about, and so it was really, really helpful to have those museum advisors. And so we decided as a research project, as a group, that we were going to have 4 outcomes. So this was as a result of our funding. We said we would create a Hearts of Freedom website, and so you can see the website here, heartsoffreedom.org, and it is a valuable resource for students, faculty, researchers, anyone interested in refugees and immigration work. We have complete interviews there of those who have agreed for us to post their interviews. We have papers, we have the digital exhibition that connects to the panel exhibition that I will be describing shortly. And this was developed by a former refugee from Cambodia. So he's an engineer and a website designer, and he has created this for us, Mondi Lim. We are also developing a curriculum for high school and university students that we will share with education departments across Canada, so that these stories, this part of Canada's history, can be shared with students across Canada. We are creating a book with McGill Queen's University Press. We just sent it off last week, and it is going for copy editing, and it will be published in 2025. And we created a film with the help of a former CBC executive producer, Sheila Petzold, and this film is very moving and very, very powerful. We have just purchased international rights so that we will be able to show it, not only in Canada, but in other countries. And then we are looking at perhaps making it available for free so that people can watch this film. And so in addition to these 4 original outcomes, I decided that I didn't have enough work, that I was going to create a museum exhibition, which I've never done before. And so that's what I set out to do after we completed our interviews in 2021. So we conducted our first interview in 2019, and our last interview was with former Prime Minister Joe Clark in 2021, and then we began our analysis and and looking at the various outcomes. And so I created, along with the exhibition committee, which included advisors from the museum as well as representatives from the 3 ethnic communities, and so then I was able to create this museum exhibition, which focuses on the incredible stories of the Southeast Asian refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and the impact of the Vietnam War, the Laos Secret War, and the Cambodian genocide forced millions of people to flee their homelands and to seek safety in other countries. These courageous refugees risked their lives, journeyed to different countries, and traveled thousands of miles to Canada. And so the exhibition tells their stories from their unique perspectives, adding to the fabric of the Canadian history of immigration. And so one of the main goals of this exhibition and our project is really to showcase positive stories of settlement and integration and the many contributions that Southeast Asian refugees have made here in Canada and around the world. Not to say that there weren't difficult stories and obstacles, and there were some conflict stories. And with those conflict stories, we also talk about how we can do things better. And so how can we improve on those situations where things didn't run as smoothly as possible. And so we wanted to highlight positive stories and successful stories of integration. And so we created this exhibition. I created this exhibition with the assistance of Grant Murray, who has also worked with the National Museum. So he was the overall designer. I provided the content, the photos, the quotes, and then he was able to put it all together. And once we completed this, I think we completed it in December 2022. I worked sometimes till 2 a.m. to try and complete this, because with museums, you need to make sure that you're on time, because for them to show the exhibition, I had to be in negotiation with them 2 or 3 years in advance, because they're completely booked up. And so we launched the exhibition at the Canadian Museum of Immigration, at the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec. And from there, we moved to BC under the PCHC Museum of Migration. And so we took it to Simon Fraser University Harbour Centre, we took it to Bentall Centre, we took it to UBC Robson Square campus, we took it to UBC main campus. Then we moved it to Surrey, to St. Matthew's Parish, and then we took it to Victoria, to the public library there, and then we closed the exhibition in BC at BC Government House, and the Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin co-hosted the exhibition with us there. And then from there, we moved all the way to Halifax, to the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21. I did originally wanted it to be logical, going from west to east or east to west, but that didn't work out in terms of the schedules of different museums and venues. So we were moving back and forth between different provinces a lot. And then from there, and that was really special, right? Because that's the Canadian Museum of Immigration. So many of your families, your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents would have gone through Pier 21 in coming to Canada and settling here. And so to have our exhibition there and to have it be a part of Pier 21 for almost 4 months. That was really special. And then from there, we traveled it to Manitoba Museum. And because I am from here, we were able to do a number of events, including events at Manitoba Museum, including events with UNHCR Canada, which showcased our exhibition, as well as a celebration here here at CMU, celebrating the 45th anniversary of MCC signing the first master agreement in 1979, and so it makes it 45 years this year. And then from there, we traveled it to Edmonton, and then to Calgary, and then we went to Ottawa. So the Senate of Canada, I was in negotiations with them for about a year, and we managed to come to an agreement, and they hosted the exhibition at the Senate of Canada, and we had an event and celebration there with MPs and senators and former prime ministers and ambassadors who were involved in this movement. And then from there we went to, I think, Hamilton City Hall. And then it went to Toronto Osgoode Hall Law School, then it went to Kitchener-Waterloo, the Basile School of International Affairs, and then next weekend I will be taking it to Brock University. So it is just traveling everywhere. It's been to 13 different cities, and it has had 24 different separate events. And we've also had private tours and school and university tours as well. And then in 2025, we are scheduled to go to museums in BC, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. And we are also getting interest from the United States and Europe as well. So it's continuing its travel across Canada and perhaps outside of Canada. And so the exhibition is called Hearts of Freedom, Stories of Southeast Asian Refugees, and it follows three themes. And so one of the themes is escape journeys and refugee camps. We started the interviews with questions about what life was like before they escaped to refugee camps. And from there, we followed their stories in terms of their journeys to a refugee camps and what their life was like in a refugee camp. And you can see on the panels here that the stories of the Vietnamese are in red, the stories of the Laotians are in blues, and then the stories of the Cambodians are in yellow. And so we wanted to capture all of their stories because many times we don't hear a lot from the Laotians and Cambodians, and we hear more from the Vietnamese because it is a larger population. But we wanted to capture all of these three groups because they have some similarities as well as some differences in terms of their experiences. And so the escape journeys and refugee camps, you can see here in this map that the different people from the different countries took different routes in order to find a refugee camp who will take them in and then to apply for resettlement in third countries. So you can see Vietnam, which is in the red. They are right along the South China Sea, so they had many options in terms of escaping. So some of them actually went to China, some of them went to Hong Kong, some even went to Japan, others went to the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, just because they had many different routes to take. But when you take a look at the Laotian in the blue, Laos is a landlocked country. So they are not close to any waters, and so the majority of them basically cross the Mekong River into Thailand to seek asylum and to go to a refugee camp there. And some even trek through the mountains and jungles because the borders are quite open there, and so they were able to escape by crossing through the mountains. And again, these journeys can be dangerous as well, right? Just as the Vietnamese boat people in over leaky, crowded boats being attacked by pirates, you had Laotians trying to escape across the Mekong River with soldiers on both sides of the river. The Lao soldiers were told to shoot anyone trying to leave, and the Thai soldiers were told to shoot anyone trying to land. And then the river can be quite dangerous with boulders jutting out and whirlpools and all of that. And so a number of people have died trying to escape that way. And then you have the Cambodians in the yellow. So some of them went to Vietnam, others went to Laos, and then some went to Thailand. So I would say the majority of them went to Thailand. And again, crossing the jungles and the rivers in order to get to their destination or to the refugee camps. The stories from the Cambodians are horrific, right? Some of them were walking over mass graves, and some of them were being shot at as they were trying to escape. Some of them were driven in a truck and dumped, over the side of the mountains, and then they were being shot at. And so these stories are just horrific in terms of those kinds of experiences. And so I just want to share Judy Trin's story. And so Judy Trin is a CTV journalist. She also used to work for CBC, and she recalls a story, and this is a picture that she has given us, and it is a picture of an overcrowded boat that her family was on. She was 4 years old, and this boat basically left Vietnam and made its way to Malaysia, but the Malaysian government would not give them permission to land in their waters, and so they could not get to shore in order to get processed. And so the boat captain said, "We are going to sink the ship." And so as they were going to do that, he asked the people to jump overboard and to swim to shore. She was 4 years old, and her mother was with her, I believe, 2-year-old sister. Her father jumps overboard first into the water and was waiting for her to jump, and she, being 4 years old, just froze. She could not jump. And so her mother had to grab her and threw her overboard. And she said to this day, her mother still has nightmares about having to do that. And then her father was able to catch her in the water, and then the mother and the younger child jumped overboard. And so these stories, right, you can hear in some of their journeys and escape to refugee camps. And then panel 2 talks about government policies and sponsorships. As I mentioned earlier, the 1976 Immigration Act, it was the first immigration act that outlined objectives of an immigration policy. And so this was really important in terms of Canada's history of immigration. And also in terms of how were the sponsors able to assist people in addressing their conflicts and in settling here in Canada. And I just wanted to quickly show a picture of MCC signing the master agreement here in March 1979. Again, this was the first master agreement, and this really changed how Canada and Canadians were able to privately sponsor refugees. And this model is being modeled in other countries around the world. And then this is a photo of former Prime Minister Joe Clark. He recalled in his interview the importance of collaboration between different governments as well as with communities here in Canada, and he laments the fact that today we are so divisive and so polarized, and he talks about the importance of collaboration, and because of the collaboration they were able to do what they did. And he shared a story about Ron Atke, the former Minister of Employment and Immigration at that time, that he actually took a book, None is Too Many, that was about the Jews during the Holocaust and how Canada turned away the Jews, and many of them had to go back and they were killed. And he said, do you want to be remembered as not helping? And so that led to the PC government coming up with the 50,000 for 1979, 1980 to resettle refugees. And then Flora MacDonald, who is the first Secretary of State, went to the United Nations that year and said, Canada has agreed to take in 50,000 Southeast Asian refugees, and then she pointed to all the different representatives of all the different countries and said, what are you going to do about it? And so these were, really important. And then this story, I think, is really, really interesting. So this is actually a photo of my mother, Pinkham, and her friend, Margaret. And my overall designer said he had to put this story in there. And it's a story about ordinary Canadians who stepped up and helped out. So my mom did not speak English at that time, and so she was sent to work in a sewing factory, and she didn't speak English, she didn't have a way of getting there. This woman volunteered to drive her to and from work every day and to drive the children to daycare. And they never spoke a word of English. And as we moved away and moved to Vancouver because it was warmer, we lost touch, and my mom lost touch with her. And then 32 years later, my mom said, "Can we drive to this small community in Manitoba? And I want to find this woman." And so we drove to this small community, and she said, "I think it's this road. Let's turn down this road, and I think it's this house." So we drove into the driveway, and we got out of the car, we knocked on the door, and lo and behold, this woman answers the door. And she recognized my mom instantly, and they burst into tears. And for the next few hours, they reconnected, and she said, "I can't believe it, you speak English." Because at that time, right, they weren't able to speak to one another. And so after 32 years, they reunited, and they FaceTime, they text, they can be on cell phones. And so that's an incredible story. And then maybe I'll move towards ending here. So the third panel looks at settlement and integration. So this is really, really important to look at where the former refugees are at today and how have they integrated here in Canada. And I would say the majority of those stories were very, very positive. And so I do want to just, talk a little bit about Dr. Nung Tran Davies. So she was 5 years old when she left Vietnam with her family. Her mother was a widow. And she arrived in Canada, and she worked really hard in terms of her studies, and she became a medical doctor. And then in 2016, when she heard about the Syrian refugees, she and her friends got together and they sponsored Syrian refugees. And she said, "This is like coming full circle. I was sponsored in the late 1970s and 1979, and now I am able to sponsor Syrian refugees." And so this was really meaningful to her to be able to do this. And so you can see, right, that there are stories about freedom, hope, and resilience. These people wanted to flee from persecution and violence. They wanted to be free to make choices and to live in peace. They also had hope, right, for the future, had hope that their children would have a better life here in Canada. And they also had resilience. They had courage, strength, and determination to start a new life here in Canada. And so maybe I'll just end it with the story of Dr. Huang. He was a dentist, and when he came to Canada, he had to renounce his qualifications. So he had to start from scratch again. He said, "That's okay, I'm willing to start from scratch." He came to Canada and was a dishwasher and went to school full-time. And he succeeded and now has a successful dentist practice in Edmonton and is giving very much to his communities and to other communities around the world. And so I just want to share just a few photos here of the different generations, first, second, third generation Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians who have come together to these events to celebrate their stories. We've also had different kinds of art as part of the celebration, whether they are traditional dancers or artists and singers. And so we also celebrated in Ottawa, and many people wanted to thank former Prime Minister Joe Clark for his assistance to refugees during that time. And then, of course, 2025 marks the 50th anniversary of them finding freedom and hope for the future. And so this is really, really important. And the Hearts of Freedom project is a reminder to a world that is increasingly polarized that our best moments have come with generosity in the breaking down of barriers, and that those actions reap rich rewards. I think it's an incredible story about a remarkable time, and after 40 years, these people are able to share their stories. And I think storytelling is a way of knowing and a way of sharing hope in our world. And so I think storytelling and communication through the arts can be very powerful and bring people together. So I'm really fortunate to be a part of this incredible project. And thank you so much for listening. And so we'll have some time for a Q&A. Thank you.